and so on.
I call the honourable member Ian Lees-Galloway.
Mr Chair, it's my pleasure to relieve Mr Ockenvold from that arduous task of trying to address part one of the Crown Entities Reform Bill. Now, Mr Speaker, I would like to speak to part one, and this is the part that the Labour opposition is most supportive of, and in fact, I anticipate that we will support this part of the bill. We can't say the same for other parts, but we will support this part of the bill. It is the part of the bill that establishes the Health Promotion Agency by amalgamating ALAC with the Health Sponsorship Council. And although a number of submitters to the Select Committee established some reservations about that, especially folding ALAC into another organisation at a time when Parliament and New Zealand is acutely focused on the issue of alcohol harm and what we can do to reduce alcohol-related harm, most submitters were supportive of the establishment of the new Health Promotion Agency, a single agency which will focus on public health initiatives and the promotion of health and well-being. And I note that one of the amendments that the Select Committee made to the bill was to add those words "and well-being" after the word health. And I think that was a wise amendment by the Select Committee, because that is in fact what a health promotion agency should actually be about, maintaining and encouraging and fostering the conditions for healthy lifestyles, for good overall well-being in a population. I noticed that a lot of the rhetoric that goes with this piece of legislation is that it is New Zealand's first attempt, I suppose, to implement the Ottawa Charter, and Kevin Haig spoke about this a little last night. But I think it's a very limited, and it's an aspect of the Ottawa Charter, but it certainly doesn't, by any stretch of the imagination, implement the entire Ottawa Charter. This is the health promotion part of the Ottawa Charter, but the Ottawa Charter also talks about the environment, the community, the settings, the public health policy settings, and the fact that that goes beyond the health system. It goes beyond what we do in hospitals and doctors' surgeries, and indeed what we will do in the Health Promotion Agency. It goes into all the other policies and decisions that governments make, such as should we have more pokies in our community, such as should we get rid of programs like Healthy Eating, Healthy Action that support good nutrition and physical activity amongst our young people. And in that respect, I think that some of the government's changes that it has made over the last 4 years are somewhat counterintuitive. Whilst we absolutely support any intention to implement the Ottawa Charter, and this is part of it, in so many other ways, the government has actually run in a completely contrary direction to what the Ottawa Charter actually suggests. So I don't think the government can congratulate itself all that much on its efforts to implement or even adhere to the principles of the Ottawa Charter. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I should say, that is really what a lot of the submissions on Part 1 were about. People were concerned that the amalgamation of these organisations might take the focus off the efforts to reduce alcohol-related harm, and of course a lot of the efforts to reduce alcohol-related harm are to do with the environment in which alcohol is available and the environment in which alcohol is consumed, and of course in that respect Parliament is regarding the Alcohol Reform Bill, which many of the submitters to this piece of legislation argued was not as strong or as robust or as forthright as it could be, and that's an argument or a debate that we will have on another day. The Cancer Society submitted that part of the HPA's core business should be addressing the issue of alcohol sponsorship in the same way as the Health Sponsorship Council was originally established to address tobacco sponsorship. Now that is certainly an issue that I would like to see the HPA consider in the future, which is how do we... Mr Chair?
I call the honourable member in Lees-Galloway.
Which is how do we look at adjusting the environment in which alcohol is, I suppose, perceived, not just by young people, but by all people in New Zealand, in the way that alcohol is so closely related to the sponsorship of sports and other community organisations, I think particularly of student associations and the close relationship between the alcohol companies and the student associations. So that is certainly part of the very, very close, you're right, Mr Robertson, but I think that should certainly be part of the HPA's core functions, which of course are established here in Part 1. The other aspect that I would like to touch on briefly in Part 1 is the question of the ALAC levy, which of course will continue more or less in its current form, except that the levy will now go to the HPA, but this legislation sets out the parameters under which that levy can be spent, and it will be hypothecated directly into alcohol-related activities and alcohol harm reduction activities that the HPA will be carrying out. Now, a number of submitters, particularly the Smoke Free Coalition, submitted to the Select Committee that there was an opportunity to go down the same pathway for tobacco, to have a hypothecated tobacco levy that could be used for health promotion activities that reduce the harm related to tobacco. Now, I know the Select Committee considered this and ultimately rejected that proposal. And certainly I think it's something which requires far more consideration than would be available if a member was to put up a supplementary order paper in this debate. So that's certainly not something that I propose, but I think it's an idea that has merit and ought to be considered by, perhaps that would be something for the Health Promotion Agency to consider and report back to the Minister and report back to Parliament about the possibility of introducing a tobacco levy that is analogous to the alcohol levy, specifically to be used for health promotion activities. We know that there is already a considerable excise tax, and we have heard in the media that the government is considering increasing that again tomorrow when they announce the next budget. However, whilst that is considerably larger than the amount of money which is already spent on health promotion activity, of course, the costs associated with tobacco use are not solely to do with health promotion activities. Of course, most of the cost related to tobacco use comes from the cost of the disease, the cost of lost productivity, the cost of hospitalisations and care for people who end up getting smoking-related diseases and suffering with smoking-related diseases. And that cost is significant, and many people would argue actually outweighs the excise tax amount which is taken. That's an option. It's not in this bill, and I'm not proposing it as a supplementary order paper, but I do recognise that the committee gave some consideration to this, and I hope that it is something which that Parliament can come back to at some point in the future. Mr Speaker, as I said, overall, with some reservations, Labour opposition is supportive of Part 1. We look forward to seeing the Health Promotion Agency engaging in a range of health promotion activities to reduce not only the economic costs associated with the burden of disease, but also the social costs, particularly those diseases which are utterly preventable, the diseases associated with alcohol, the diseases associated with tobacco, the diseases associated with poor nutrition and poor physical activity. Those are the diseases that will be the greatest burden on the health system in the years to come, and those are the diseases that we have an opportunity to step in and do more about now. But it is the Health Promotion Agency is just a small part of that. This needs to be something that government considers across all its policies, and I reiterate our concern on this side of the House that many of the policies that have been introduced by this government over the last 4 years run absolutely counter to the concept of maintaining healthy lifestyles, maintaining well-being across the population of New Zealand. And if the government isn't prepared to do more in that policy sphere, then we are going to burden the health system with unnecessary cost. We are going to burden society with unnecessary disease. And that, Mr Speaker, I think is a very short-sighted and unfortunate approach.
I call the honourable member Kevin Hay.